fired and facing death threats. He uncovered a global conspiracy. Now the world's most powerful people want him too. Welcome to the channel. Enjoy the video, give it a like, subscribe, turn on notifications, comment, and share. The night air in Silicon Valley carried a crisp chill as Daniel Reeves stepped out of the gleaming glass doors of Teknova's headquarters. His fingers trembled slightly as he clutched a cardboard box containing the meager remnants of his 3-year tenure at the startup. The weight of the situation pressed down on him like an invisible force, threatening to crush his spirit. Just moments ago, he had been unceremoniously fired from his position as lead software engineer, a role he had poured his heart and soul into since joining the company. As he made his way across the nearly empty parking lot, the events of the past hour replayed in his mind like a surreal nightmare. The summons to CEO Marcus Blackwood's office had seemed routine at first, perhaps another late-night strategy session to discuss the company's latest project. But the moment Daniel stepped into the room, he sensed something was terribly wrong. Marcus, usually the picture of charismatic enthusiasm, sat behind his imposing mahogany desk with an uncharacteristically grim expression. "Daniel, I'm afraid I have some difficult news," he had begun, his voice devoid of its usual warmth. "We're going to have to let you go. Effective immediately." The words had hit Daniel like a physical blow, leaving him momentarily stunned. "But why?" he had managed to stammer, his mind reeling as he tried to process the sudden upheaval of his professional life. Marcus's explanation had been vague and unsatisfying, filled with corporate platitudes about restructuring and changing directions. But what struck Daniel most was the fleeting look of, was it guilt? Fear? Something in Marcus's eyes didn't match the rehearsed speech he was delivering. Now, as Daniel reached his car, a modest sedan that seemed to mock his shattered dreams of startup riches, he couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to his termination than met the eye. He placed the box on the passenger seat and slumped behind the wheel, not yet ready to start the engine, and faced the reality of driving home to an empty apartment. The parking lot was eerily quiet, most of Teknova's employees having left hours ago. Only a few cars remained, belonging to the workaholics and those burning the midnight oil to meet impossible deadlines. Daniel's gaze drifted back to the building, its sleek facade now seeming cold and forbidding. A movement in one of the upper windows caught his attention. Squinting, he could make out 2 figures engaged in what appeared to be a heated discussion. One was unmistakably Marcus, his tall frame and perfectly coiffed hair easily recognizable even at a distance. The other man was unfamiliar to Daniel, shorter, stockier, with an air of menace even from afar. As Daniel watched, the stranger grabbed Marcus by the lapels of his expensive suit, shoving him against the window. Daniel's heart began to race. What was he witnessing? Before he could process the scene further, both figures abruptly moved away from the window, disappearing from view. The encounter left Daniel with a sinking feeling in the pit of his stomach. Something was very wrong at Teknova, and he had a nagging suspicion that his unexpected termination was somehow connected to whatever was transpiring in that office. Taking a deep breath, Daniel made a decision that would alter the course of his life forever. Instead of starting his car and driving away from Teknova and the career he had built there, he quietly exited the vehicle and made his way back toward the building. The security guard who had escorted him out earlier was nowhere to be seen, likely making rounds elsewhere on the sprawling campus. With trembling hands, Daniel swiped his employee badge against the card reader. To his immense relief, it hadn't yet been deactivated. The door unlocked with a soft click, and he slipped inside, his heart pounding so loudly he was sure it would give him away. The lobby was deserted, the usual bustle of startup energy replaced by an eerie silence. Daniel's footsteps echoed softly on the polished concrete floor as he made his way to the elevators. As he ascended to the executive floor, his mind raced with possibilities. What if he was caught? How would he explain his presence in the building after being fired? But the need to uncover the truth outweighed his fears. The elevator doors opened silently, revealing a dimly lit hallway. Daniel could hear muffled voices coming from Marcus's office at the end of the corridor. Cautiously, he crept forward, every nerve in his body screaming at him to turn back. As he neared the partially open door, the voices became clearer. "You promised me results, Blackwood." The gravelly voice belonged to the stranger Daniel had seen earlier. "I've invested too much in this operation to see it fail now." Marcus's reply was placating, tinged with desperation. "I assure you, Mr. Kovacs, everything is under control. The algorithm is nearly perfected. We just need a little more time." "Time?" Kovacs spat the word like a curse. "Time is a luxury we don't have. The buyers are getting impatient. If we can't deliver soon, they'll look elsewhere. And trust me, you don't want to disappoint these particular clients." Daniel's mind whirled. Algorithm? Buyers? What kind of operation was Marcus running behind the scenes at Technova? "I understand the pressure," Marcus continued, his voice strained. "But we hit a snag with the latest version. That's why I had to let Reeves go. He was getting too close, asking too many questions. I couldn't risk him figuring out what we're really doing here." The revelation hit Daniel like a thunderbolt. His termination wasn't about restructuring or changing directions. He had been fired because he was on the verge of uncovering something sinister. Kovacs let out a mirthless chuckle. "Ah yes, the brilliant Mr. Reeves. Are you sure firing him was enough? Men like that don't just walk away when they sense something's amiss." There was a pause, and Daniel could almost feel Marcus's hesitation. "What are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting we take more permanent measures to ensure Mr. Reeves doesn't become a problem." The implication in Kovacs's words sent a chill down Daniel's spine. They were talking about silencing him permanently. Marcus's voice rose in protest. "Now wait a minute. I never signed up for anything like that. This was supposed to be a simple data mining operation. Valuable information sold to the highest bidder. I didn't agree to—" "You agreed," Kovacs cut him off sharply. "The moment you took my money. You don't get to decide where this ends, Blackwood. You're in far too deep now." Daniel's mind raced. He needed to get out of there, to process what he had heard and figure out his next move. But as he began to back away from the door, his elbow brushed against a decorative vase perched on a nearby console table. Time seemed to slow as Daniel watched in horror as the vase teetered, then crashed to the floor with a deafening shatter. The voices in the office abruptly ceased. "What was that?" Kovacs demanded. Daniel didn't wait to hear more. He turned and sprinted down the hallway, his heart pounding in his ears. Behind him, he could hear the office door being flung open and Marcus shouting, "Security! Intruder on the executive floor!" Reaching the elevator, Daniel jabbed frantically at the call button. The seconds it took for the car to arrive felt like an eternity. Just as the doors began to slide open, he heard rapid footsteps approaching. Daniel threw himself into the elevator, repeatedly hitting the button for the lobby. As the doors slowly closed, he caught a glimpse of Kovacs rounding the corner, his face contorted with rage. The descent to the lobby was agonizing. Daniel's mind raced, trying to process everything he had learned in the past few minutes. Technova, the company he had devoted years of his life to, was involved in something illegal, possibly dangerous. And now he was a liability they wanted to eliminate. As soon as the elevator doors opened, Daniel bolted across the lobby. He could hear shouts and the sound of pursuit behind him. Bursting through the main doors, he sprinted across the parking lot to his car. With shaking hands, he fumbled for his keys, dropping them once before managing to unlock the door. Just as he slid into the driver's seat, he saw Marcus and Kovacs emerge from the building, followed closely by 2 security guards. Daniel started the engine and peeled out of the parking lot, tires screeching in protest. As he sped down the empty streets of Silicon Valley, his mind was a whirlwind of fear and disbelief. In the span of a few hours, his entire world had been turned upside down. He was now unemployed, possibly in danger, and in possession of information that could bring down the company he had once been proud to work for. Daniel's hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. He had no idea where he was going or what he would do next. All he knew was that he couldn't go home. It would be the first place they'd look for him. He needed time to think, to plan his next move. As the lights of Silicon Valley faded in his rearview mirror, Daniel Reeves found himself on an unexpected journey, one that would test his courage, challenge his beliefs, and ultimately lead him to uncover truths far beyond anything he could have imagined. The night that began with his unceremonious firing had set in motion a chain of events that would not only change his life, but potentially impact the entire tech industry and beyond. The road ahead was dark and uncertain, but Daniel knew one thing for certain: he couldn't walk away from what he had discovered. Whatever the cost, he had to find a way to expose the truth and bring those responsible to justice. As the first hints of dawn began to lighten the eastern sky, Daniel made a solemn vow to himself. He would not rest until he uncovered the full extent of Technova's illegal activities and ensured that Marcus Blackwood, Kovacs, and anyone else involved faced the consequences of their actions. Little did Daniel know that his quest for truth would lead him down a rabbit hole of corporate espionage, international intrigue, and personal redemption. The journey ahead would push him to his limits, forcing him to confront not only external threats, but also his own fears and insecurities. It would be a test of resilience, ingenuity, and the unbreakable spirit of a man determined to do what's right, no matter the odds stacked against him. As he drove into the unknown, the weight of his newfound purpose settled upon Daniel's shoulders. He was no longer just a software engineer who had lost his job. He was now a man with a mission, one that would require every ounce of his skill, courage, and determination. The road ahead was fraught with danger, but it was a path he knew he had to take. The sun began to rise on the horizon, casting a warm glow over the California landscape. For Daniel, it symbolized not just the dawn of a new day, but the beginning of a new chapter in his life. A chapter filled with uncertainty, danger, and the potential for great change. As he continued to drive, putting distance between himself and the life he once knew, Daniel steeled himself for the challenges that lay ahead. He had no way of knowing the full extent of what he was up against or the powerful forces that would soon be aligned against him. But in that moment, as the first rays of sunlight streamed through his car windows, Daniel felt a surge of determination. Whatever lay ahead, he would face it head-on, armed with the truth and driven by an unwavering commitment to justice. The open road stretched before him, a metaphor for the journey he was about to embark upon. It would be a journey of self-discovery, of pushing beyond his perceived limitations, and of fighting for what he believed in. As Silicon Valley disappeared in his rearview mirror, Daniel Reeves set his sights on the challenges ahead, ready to take on whatever obstacles stood in his way. Little did he know that his decision to uncover the truth about Technova would set in motion a series of events that would not only change his life, but potentially reshape the entire landscape of the tech industry. The night that began with his unexpected termination had become the catalyst for a much larger story, one of corruption, redemption, and the power of one individual to make a difference in the face of overwhelming odds. As Daniel drove on, the gravity of his situation began to sink in. He was now a man on the run, with no clear plan and potentially dangerous enemies in pursuit. The adrenaline that had fueled his escape from Technova was starting to wear off, replaced by a gnawing sense of anxiety and uncertainty. He needed a safe place to gather his thoughts and formulate a strategy. But where could he go? His apartment was out of the question. It would be the first place Marcus and his associates would look. Friends and family were also risky. He couldn't bear the thought of putting them in danger. As the miles ticked by on his odometer, Daniel racked his brain for options. Suddenly, a memory surfaced. A conversation he'd had months ago with an old college friend, Alex Chen. Alex had mentioned owning a small cabin in the Santa Cruz Mountains, a place he used as a weekend getaway. Daniel had half-jokingly asked if he could borrow it sometime when he needed to escape the pressures of Silicon Valley. Now, that offhand request seemed like a lifeline. Pulling over at a deserted rest stop, Daniel dug out his phone. He hesitated for a moment, knowing that using it could potentially allow his pursuers to track him. But he needed help, and Alex was his best hope. Taking a deep breath, he dialed the number. After several rings, a groggy voice answered. "Hello? Alex, it's Daniel. I'm sorry to wake you, but I'm in trouble and I need your help." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Daniel, what's going on? Are you okay?" Daniel's voice cracked slightly as he replied, "Not really. I can't explain everything right now, but I need a place to lay low for a while. Remember that cabin you told me about? Is there any chance I could use it?" Alex's tone shifted from sleepy confusion to concern. "Of course, man. Whatever you need. Let me text you the address and the code for the lockbox. There's some basic supplies there, but you might want to stop for food on the way." Relief washed over Daniel. "Thank you, Alex. I owe you big time. Don't worry about it. Just be careful, okay? And let me know if there's anything else I can do to help." After ending the call, Daniel quickly jotted down the cabin's location and lockbox code. He then removed the battery from his phone, knowing it was a risk to keep it powered on. As he pulled back onto the highway, he felt a small measure of hope. He had a destination now, a temporary sanctuary where he could regroup and plan his next move. The drive to the Santa Cruz Mountains took several hours, with Daniel taking a circuitous route to throw off any potential pursuit. As he wound his way up the narrow, tree-lined roads, the events of the night played on a loop in his mind. The shocking conversation he had overheard, the realization that his termination was part of a larger, sinister plot, the heart-pounding escape from Technova. It all seemed like a surreal nightmare. Finally, as the first light of dawn began to filter through the dense canopy of redwoods, Daniel spotted the turnoff for Alex's cabin. The narrow dirt driveway led to a small, rustic structure nestled among the trees. It wasn't much, but to Daniel, it looked like a fortress of solitude. After retrieving the key from the lockbox, Daniel entered the cabin. It was a simple one-room affair with a small kitchenette, a worn but comfortable-looking sofa, and a bed tucked into one corner. A layer of dust covered everything, evidence that it had been some time since Alex or anyone else had visited. Exhaustion suddenly hit Daniel like a physical force. The adrenaline that had kept him going through the night had finally worn off, leaving him drained. He barely managed to kick off his shoes before collapsing onto the bed, falling into a deep, dreamless sleep. When Daniel awoke, the sun was high in the sky, streaming through the cabin's windows. For a moment he was disoriented, unsure of where he was or how he had gotten there. Then, like a flood, the memories of the previous night came rushing back. He sat up abruptly, his heart racing as he recalled the danger he was in. Glancing at his watch, he was shocked to see that he had slept for nearly 10 hours. Panic set in as he realized how much time he had lost. What if Marcus and Kovacs had somehow tracked him here? He rushed to the window, half expecting to see black SUVs coming up the driveway. But there was nothing, just the peaceful forest surrounding the cabin. Taking a deep breath, Daniel forced himself to calm down. He was safe for now, but he couldn't afford to waste any more time. He needed to figure out his next move, and for that, he needed more information. He needed to understand exactly what he was up against. Daniel's stomach growled, reminding him that he hadn't eaten since before his ill-fated meeting with Marcus the previous day. Rummaging through the cabin's small kitchenette, he found some canned goods and a package of stale crackers. It wasn't much, but it would have to do for now. As he ate his meager meal, Daniel's mind raced, trying to piece together the fragments of information he had overheard. Technova was clearly involved in something illegal, but what exactly? Marcus had mentioned an algorithm and buyers who were getting impatient. And then there was Kovacs, the menacing figure who seemed to be pulling the strings behind the scenes. Daniel had always prided himself on his ability to solve complex problems. As a software engineer, he had tackled countless challenging projects, breaking them down into manageable pieces and methodically working through each component. Now, he needed to apply that same analytical mindset to his current situation. He looked around the cabin, searching for something to write on. In a drawer, he found an old notebook and a pen. Sitting at the small dining table, Daniel began to jot down everything he could remember from the conversation he had overheard.
Algorithm, he wrote at the top of the page. What kind of algorithm could be valuable enough to justify the level of secrecy and danger surrounding it? As he pondered this question, a chilling thought occurred to him. In the weeks leading up to his termination, Daniel had been working on a project that he now realized could have far-reaching implications if misused. The project was an advanced machine learning algorithm designed to analyze vast amounts of personal data from various sources: social media, online shopping habits, geolocation data, and more. The stated purpose was to create more targeted advertising campaigns for Technova's clients. But in the wrong hands, such an algorithm could be used for much more nefarious purposes. Daniel's blood ran cold as he considered the possibilities. With access to enough data, this algorithm could potentially predict human behavior with frightening accuracy. It could be used to manipulate elections, influence financial markets, or even identify individuals susceptible to radicalization. He scribbled furiously in the notebook, connecting the dots between his work and the snippets of conversation he had overheard. If his suspicions were correct, Technova wasn't just engaging in corporate espionage or data theft. They were potentially developing a tool that could undermine the very fabric of society. As the implications of his discovery sank in, Daniel felt a mix of emotions wash over him. There was fear, certainly, fear for his own safety, and for the potential consequences if this algorithm fell into the wrong hands. But there was also a sense of responsibility. He had helped create this technology, albeit unknowingly for such malicious purposes. Now, he had a duty to stop it from being misused. But how? He was just one person, up against a powerful corporation with seemingly unlimited resources and dangerous allies. The odds seemed insurmountable. Daniel stood up and began to pace the small confines of the cabin, his mind working overtime. He needed a plan, and he needed allies. But who could he trust? Anyone connected to Technova was potentially compromised. The police? Without concrete evidence, they were unlikely to take his claims seriously. And going public with his suspicions would only paint a larger target on his back. As he pondered his limited options, Daniel's gaze fell on his discarded phone, still sitting on the bedside table with its battery removed. He picked it up, turning it over in his hands as an idea began to form. Throughout his career in Silicon Valley, Daniel had cultivated a network of contacts in the tech world. Among them was a journalist named Samantha Reyes, known for her hard-hitting exposés on the darker side of the industry. They had met at a conference a year ago, and Daniel had been impressed by her intelligence and integrity. If anyone could help him unravel this conspiracy and bring it to light, it was Samantha. But reaching out to her would be risky. Once he turned his phone on, he would be traceable. He would need to move quickly. Taking a deep breath, Daniel made his decision. He replaced the battery in his phone and powered it on. As soon as it connected to the network, a flood of notifications came through, missed calls and messages, mostly from concerned friends and colleagues who had heard about his sudden termination. Ignoring these for now, Daniel quickly composed an email to Samantha. He kept it vague, not wanting to reveal too much in writing, but emphasized the urgency of the situation and his need for her help. After hitting send, he immediately turned the phone off again and removed the battery. Now, all he could do was wait and hope that Samantha would respond. In the meantime, he needed to prepare for the possibility that his location had been compromised. Daniel began to gather what few supplies he could find in the cabin. Some bottled water, the remaining canned food, a flashlight he found in a drawer. He stuffed these into a backpack he discovered in the small closet. As he was doing this, a noise outside made him freeze. It sounded like a car engine, growing louder as it approached. Daniel's heart began to race. Had they found him already? He crept to the window, carefully peering out through the dusty curtains. A battered pickup truck was making its way up the dirt driveway. Daniel held his breath as the vehicle came to a stop in front of the cabin. The driver's door opened, and a man stepped out. But it wasn't Kovacs or any of Technova's security team. It was an older man, probably in his 60s, with a weathered face and a gray beard. The man approached the cabin, and Daniel tensed, unsure of what to do. Should he try to slip out the back? But before he could decide, there was a knock at the door. "Hello," the man called out. "Anyone in there? I saw the car and just wanted to check if everything's all right." Daniel hesitated. This could be a trap, but the man's tone seemed genuinely concerned. After a moment's deliberation, Daniel decided to take a chance. He opened the door slightly, keeping the chain lock engaged. "Hi," Daniel said, trying to keep his voice steady. "I'm sorry. I'm a friend of Alex Chen. He said I could use the cabin for a few days." The old man's face relaxed into a friendly smile. "Oh, you're a friend of Alex? That's good to hear. I'm Jim, by the way. I'm sort of the unofficial caretaker for this area. Just like to keep an eye on things, you know?" Daniel nodded, feeling some of the tension leave his body. "I'm Daniel. I appreciate you checking in. Everything's fine here." Jim seemed to sense Daniel's unease. His expression turned more serious. "Listen, son, I don't mean to pry, but you seem a bit on edge. If you're in some kind of trouble, maybe I can help. I've been around these parts for a long time, and I know how to keep things quiet if need be." For a moment, Daniel was tempted to confide in this kind stranger, but he quickly thought better of it. The less Jim knew, the safer he would be. "I appreciate that, Jim. Really. But I'm okay. Just needed a little time away from the city to clear my head." Jim nodded, seemingly understanding. "All right then. Well, if you need anything, supplies, directions, whatever. I'm just down the road. First house on the left after you hit the main road. Don't be a stranger." As Jim turned to leave, Daniel felt a sudden impulse. "Jim, wait," he called out. The old man turned back. If anyone comes looking for me, anyone who's not Alex, could you—" Jim's expression softened with understanding. "Don't you worry, son. Far as I'm concerned, there's nobody staying up here but the squirrels and the birds. You take care now." With that, Jim got back in his truck and drove away, leaving Daniel with a mixture of relief and gratitude. He may not have an army on his side, but at least he had one unexpected ally in these woods. Closing the door, Daniel returned to his preparations. He didn't know when or if Samantha would respond to his message, but he needed to be ready to move at a moment's notice. As he worked, his mind continued to race, trying to piece together the larger puzzle of Technova's activities. What was the end game for Marcus and Kovacs? Who were these mysterious buyers they had mentioned? And most importantly, how could Daniel stop them before it was too late? As the day wore on, Daniel found himself constantly checking his phone, hoping for a response from Samantha. Each time he powered it on, he felt a jolt of anxiety, knowing that he was potentially revealing his location. But he had no choice. Samantha was his best hope for exposing the truth. Finally, as the sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows through the cabin windows, Daniel's phone buzzed with a new email notification. His heart raced as he opened the message from Samantha. "Daniel, your message was concerning, to say the least. I'm intrigued, but I need more information before I can commit to helping. Can you meet me tomorrow at 2 p.m.? There's a small cafe in Santa Cruz called The Lighthouse. It's public enough to be safe, but quiet enough for a private conversation. If this works for you, simply reply with confirmed." "Stay safe, Samantha." Daniel's fingers trembled slightly as he typed out his one-word reply, confirmed. He then quickly powered off the phone again, his mind already racing with plans for tomorrow's meeting. The prospect of leaving the relative safety of the cabin filled Daniel with apprehension, but he knew it was necessary. Samantha was taking a risk by agreeing to meet him, and he couldn't squander this opportunity. He spent the rest of the evening preparing, jotting down everything he could remember about the algorithm and the conversation he had overheard. As night fell, Daniel found sleep elusive. He lay on the cabin's small bed, staring at the ceiling, his mind replaying the events that had led him to this point. How had his life changed so dramatically in just a couple of days? He had gone from being a respected software engineer to a man on the run, caught up in a web of corporate intrigue and potential danger. In the quiet darkness of the cabin, doubt began to creep in.
Was he in over his head? Should he just walk away, try to start a new life somewhere far from Silicon Valley and the troubles that had found him there? The temptation was strong, but every time he considered it, he thought about the potential consequences if Technova's plans came to fruition. No, he couldn't walk away. Too much was at stake. When dawn finally broke, Daniel was already awake, having managed only a few fitful hours of sleep. He gathered his meager belongings and took one last look around the cabin that had been his sanctuary. Then, steeling himself for what lay ahead, he stepped out into the crisp morning air. The drive to Santa Cruz was tense, with Daniel constantly checking his rearview mirror for any signs of pursuit. He arrived in the coastal town with plenty of time to spare, parking his car several blocks away from the Lighthouse Cafe as a precaution. As he walked the streets of Santa Cruz, Daniel was struck by how normal everything seemed. People went about their day, laughing, shopping, enjoying the sunshine, completely unaware of the potential threat looming over their lives. It made him all the more determined to see this through, to protect this innocence from those who would exploit it. The Lighthouse Cafe was a small, cozy establishment tucked away on a side street. Daniel arrived early, choosing a table near the back with a clear view of both the entrance and the rear exit. He ordered a coffee, more to have something to do with his hands than out of any real desire for caffeine. At precisely 2 p.m., the cafe door opened and Samantha Reyes walked in. Daniel recognized her immediately from the conference where they had met. She was in her early 30s, with sharp, intelligent eyes that scanned the room quickly before landing on Daniel. Without hesitation, she made her way to his table and sat down. "Daniel," she said quietly, her expression a mix of concern and curiosity. "I have to admit, your email has had me on edge. What's going on?" Daniel took a deep breath, gathering his thoughts. This was it, the moment of truth. Everything depended on convincing Samantha of the gravity of the situation. "Samantha, thank you for coming," he began, his voice low. "What I'm about to tell you is going to sound crazy, but I swear to you, it's the truth. And it's bigger than anything either of us could have imagined." Over the next hour, Daniel laid out everything he knew, his work on the algorithm, the overheard conversation between Marcus and Kovacs, his suspicions about Technova's true intentions. Samantha listened intently, her journalistic instincts clearly piqued by the story unfolding before her. When Daniel finished, Samantha sat back in her chair, her brow furrowed in thought. "This is a lot to process, Daniel. If what you're saying is true, it's not just a story. It's potentially the biggest tech scandal of the decade." "I know how it sounds," Daniel said, leaning forward. "But I swear to you every word is true. And I have proof, or at least I know where to find it. All of my work on the algorithm is still on Technova's servers. If we can access it, we can expose everything." Samantha's eyes narrowed. "Access it? Daniel, are you talking about hacking into Technova's systems? That's not just dangerous, it's illegal." Daniel nodded grimly. "I know, but what they're doing, what they're planning to do with that algorithm, it's so much worse. Sometimes you have to break the rules to do what's right." For a long moment, Samantha was silent, clearly weighing the risks and implications of what Daniel was proposing. Finally, she spoke. "Okay, Daniel, I'm in. But we do this my way. I have sources, contacts who might be able to help us, and we need to be smart about this. One wrong move, and we could both end up in prison. Or worse." Relief washed over Daniel. He wasn't alone in this anymore. "Thank you, Samantha. I promise. I'll do whatever you say. I just want to stop them before it's too late." As they began to discuss their next steps, neither Daniel nor Samantha noticed the man sitting at a table across the cafe, his face hidden behind a newspaper. But he had noticed them, and as soon as they left, he pulled out a phone and dialed a number. "Mr. Kovacs, it's Reeves. He's made contact with a journalist. How do you want me to proceed?" The voice on the other end was cold and decisive. "Follow them. Find out what they know and what they're planning. And be prepared to take action if necessary.
We can't let this get out of hand." As the man hung up and discreetly followed Daniel and Samantha out of the cafe, the stakes of the game had just been raised significantly. The race to uncover the truth and survive long enough to reveal it had begun in earnest. Over the next few days, Daniel and Samantha worked tirelessly to piece together the puzzle of Technova's illegal activities. They set up a makeshift base of operations in a rundown motel on the outskirts of Santa Cruz, chosen for its lack of security cameras and the ability to pay in cash. Samantha's journalistic skills proved invaluable as she reached out to her network of contacts, carefully probing for any information about Technova, Marcus Blackwood, or the mysterious Kovacs. Meanwhile, Daniel focused on trying to recreate as much of the algorithm as he could from memory, hoping to demonstrate its potential for misuse. Their breakthrough came on the third day when one of Samantha's sources in the tech industry came through with a crucial piece of information. The source, speaking on condition of anonymity, revealed that Technova had recently entered into a secretive partnership with a company called Nexus Dynamics. "Nexus Dynamics," Samantha explained to Daniel, her eyes alight with the thrill of uncovering a lead, "is a defense contractor with ties to several governments. They specialize in predictive analytics for national security purposes." Daniel felt a chill run down his spine as the implications became clear. So Technova isn't just selling to the highest bidder. They're potentially putting this technology in the hands of governments. Samantha nodded grimly. "And not just any governments. My source hinted that some of Nexus Dynamics' clients are nations with, let's say, questionable human rights records." The gravity of the situation weighed heavily on both of them. What had started as corporate malfeasance was rapidly evolving into a potential threat to global stability and individual freedom. As they digested this new information, Daniel's phone buzzed with a notification. He had set up alerts for any news mentioning Technova, and this one made his blood run cold. "Samantha, look at this," he said, handing her the phone. The headline read, "Technova CEO Marcus Blackwood to make major announcement at Tech Summit." The article went on to detail how Blackwood was scheduled to deliver a keynote speech at the upcoming Silicon Valley Tech Summit, where he promised to unveil a revolutionary technology that will change the face of data analytics forever. Samantha's eyes widened as she read the article. "This is it, Daniel. This is their endgame. They're going to announce the algorithm publicly, probably spinning it as some breakthrough in targeted advertising or consumer behavior prediction." Daniel nodded, his mind racing. But once it's out there, once they start licensing it, it could be used for everything from election manipulation to identifying dissidents. Samantha finished his thought. "We need to stop this announcement from happening." "The summit is in 3 days, Daniel said, running a hand through his hair in frustration. "How are we supposed to gather enough evidence and expose them in that time?" Samantha paced the small motel room, her journalist's instincts kicking into high gear. "We need to get into Technova's systems. Your old access codes, do you think they still work?" Daniel shook his head. "Doubtful. They would have revoked my access as soon as I was fired." But he trailed off, a spark of an idea forming. "But what?" Samantha pressed. "There might be another way in," Daniel said slowly, his mind working through the possibilities. "When I was working on the algorithm, I created a backdoor. It was just for testing purposes, a way to access the system remotely without going through all the usual security protocols. I never told anyone about it, and I'm pretty sure I disguised it well enough that it wouldn't have been found in a routine security sweep." Samantha's eyes lit up. "That's perfect. Can you still access it?" Daniel grimaced. "Maybe, but we'd need to be closer to Technova's servers. The back door was designed for short-range access, as a precaution. We'd need to be within about a mile of their main building." "Which means going back to Silicon Valley," Samantha said, understanding the implication. "Right into the lion's den." Daniel nodded grimly. "It's risky. If we're caught—" "We don't have a choice," Samantha cut him off. "This is our only shot at stopping them before the summit." As they began to plan their return to Silicon Valley, neither of them noticed the dark sedan parked across the street from their motel, or the man inside watching their room intently. The next morning, Daniel and Samantha set out for Silicon Valley, their hearts heavy with the weight of their mission. They had spent most of the night planning, trying to account for every possible contingency. But both of them knew that no plan survived first contact with the enemy, and they were walking into a situation where the odds were stacked heavily against them. As they drove, Samantha worked on her laptop, compiling all the information they had gathered so far into a coherent narrative. "If something happens to us," she explained, her voice tight with tension, "I want to make sure the story gets out. I've set up a dead man's switch on my email. If I don't check in every 12 hours, everything we know gets sent to my editor and several trusted colleagues." Daniel nodded, appreciating the precaution. It was a stark reminder of the danger they were facing. "Let's hope it doesn't come to that," he said, trying to inject some optimism into his voice. As they neared Silicon Valley, Daniel's anxiety began to ratchet up. Every car that passed them on the highway seemed potentially suspicious, every glance from other drivers a possible threat. He knew he was being paranoid, but after everything that had happened, he couldn't help it. They arrived in Palo Alto in the late afternoon, the familiar landscape of tech campuses and startups now seeming alien and hostile to Daniel. They checked into a small, nondescript hotel on the outskirts of town, paying cash and using false names, another precaution Samantha had insisted on. As night fell, they prepared for their infiltration attempt. The plan was to drive as close to Technova's campus as they dared, then use Daniel's laptop to attempt to access the back door he had created. If successful, they would download as much incriminating data as possible before retreating. "Remember," Samantha said as they got ready to leave, "if anything goes wrong, if we get separated, we meet back at the cafe in Santa Cruz. No phones, no electronic communication of any kind." Daniel nodded, his mouth dry with nervousness. This was it, the moment of truth. Everything they had worked for came down to the next few hours. They drove in tense silence, parking their car in a residential area about a mile from Technova's main building. The streets were quiet, most of the tech workers having gone home for the day. As Daniel powered up his laptop, he sent up a silent prayer that his back door was still operational. For several agonizing minutes, Daniel worked furiously on his keyboard, navigating through layers of security protocols. Samantha watched anxiously, keeping an eye out for any sign of trouble. Suddenly, Daniel let out a quiet exclamation of triumph. "I'm in," he whispered, hardly daring to believe it. "The back door is still active. I've got access to the main servers." Samantha leaned in, her eyes wide. "Can you find the algorithm? Any communications about the deal with Nexus Dynamics?" Daniel nodded, his fingers flying over the keys. "I'm downloading everything I can find. Emails, project files, financial records. It's all here." As the data transfer progressed, Daniel felt a growing sense of elation. They were doing it. They were actually going to expose Technova's illegal activities and prevent the algorithm from falling into the wrong hands. But their victory was short-lived. Just as the download was nearing completion, a car turned onto their street, a black SUV with tinted windows. It cruised slowly past them, then came to a stop a few houses down. "Daniel!" Samantha hissed, her voice tight with alarm. "We've got company!" Daniel looked up from his laptop, his heart racing as he saw the SUV. "Just a few more seconds," he muttered, willing the download to complete faster. The doors of the SUV opened, and two men in dark suits stepped out. Even from a distance, Daniel could see the telltale bulge of concealed weapons under their jackets. "Time to go," Samantha said urgently, already starting the car. Just then, Daniel's laptop chimed softly, indicating the download was complete. He quickly disconnected, shoved the laptop into his bag, and Samantha floored the accelerator. As they sped away, Daniel looked in the side mirror to see the two men running back to their SUV. "They're following us," he said, his voice tight with fear. Samantha's knuckles were white on the steering wheel as she navigated the quiet streets, trying to lose their pursuers. "We need to split up," she said decisively. They can't follow both of us. I'll keep driving. Try to lead them away. You get out at the next corner and make your way to the rendezvous point." Daniel wanted to argue, to insist they stay together, but he knew she was right. It was their best chance. As Samantha slowed slightly at the next intersection, Daniel grabbed his bag and rolled out of the car, hitting the ground hard but managing to scramble to his feet and dash into a nearby alley. He heard the screech of tires as Samantha accelerated away, the black SUV in hot pursuit. Daniel's heart pounded as he ran, ducking through backyards and side streets, trying to put as much distance as possible between himself and Technova's thugs. After what felt like hours but was probably only about 30 minutes, Daniel finally slowed, gasping for breath. He had no idea where he was, having run blindly in his panic to escape. Leaning against a wall in yet another dark alley, he tried to gather his thoughts and decide on his next move. The laptop in his bag felt like it weighed a ton, its contents now more valuable and dangerous than ever. He had the evidence they needed to bring down Technova, but at what cost? Was Samantha safe? Had she managed to lose their pursuers? As his breathing slowly returned to normal, Daniel realized he needed to get moving again. He was still too close to Technova, still in danger. Pulling out his phone, he was about to call for a rideshare when he hesitated. Using his phone or credit card could lead them right to him. Instead, he started walking, sticking to side streets and keeping a wary eye out for any sign of pursuit. His goal was to make it to the Caltrain station. From there, he could take the train to Santa Cruz and make his way to the rendezvous point. As he walked, his mind raced with possibilities and fears. Had they really succeeded in their mission, or had they just painted an even bigger target on their backs? And what about Marcus Blackwood and Kovacs? Surely they would realize their servers had been breached. Would they accelerate their plans, go into damage control mode? The night seemed to stretch on endlessly as Daniel made his way through the Silicon Valley suburbs. Every car that passed made him tense. Every shadow seemed to hide a potential threat. But slowly, steadily, he made progress. Finally, as the first hints of dawn began to lighten the eastern sky, Daniel arrived at the Caltrain station. He bought a ticket with cash, then huddled in a corner of the platform, trying to look inconspicuous among the early morning commuters. As he waited for the train, Daniel's thoughts turned to Samantha. Had she made it to safety? Would she be waiting for him at the cafe in Santa Cruz, or had Technova's men caught up with her? The uncertainty gnawed at him, making the wait for the train seem interminable. When the train finally arrived, Daniel boarded quickly, finding a seat near the back of the car. As the train pulled out of the station, he allowed himself a small sigh of relief. He had made it out of Silicon Valley, but he knew this was far from over. The journey to Santa Cruz felt both endless and all too short. Daniel's nerves were frayed, his body exhausted from the night's exertions and lack of sleep. But he couldn't rest, not yet. Not until he knew Samantha was safe, and they had a plan to use the information they had stolen. As the train neared Santa Cruz, Daniel's anxiety ratcheted up again. What if Technova's men were waiting at the station? What if they had somehow anticipated the rendezvous point? When the train finally pulled into the Santa Cruz station, Daniel waited until most of the other passengers had disembarked before making his move. He scanned the platform carefully, looking for any sign of trouble, before stepping off the train. The morning sun was bright, the air filled with the scent of the nearby ocean. Under different circumstances, it might have been a beautiful day. But for Daniel, every shadow held a potential threat, every passerby a possible enemy. He made his way through the streets of Santa Cruz, taking a circuitous route to the cafe where he was supposed to meet Samantha. As he approached, his heart was in his throat. Would she be there? Or would he find Technova's thugs waiting for him instead? Pausing across the street from the cafe, Daniel scanned the area carefully. The cafe looked normal, with a few early morning patrons visible through the windows. There was no sign of Samantha, but also no obvious signs of trouble. Taking a deep breath, Daniel crossed the street and entered the cafe. The bell above the door jingled cheerfully, a discordant note given the tension thrumming through his body. He ordered a coffee, more for the excuse to linger than out of any desire for caffeine. and took a seat with a clear view of both the entrance and the back door. Minutes ticked by, each one increasing Daniel's anxiety. Where was Samantha? Had something happened to her? Should he try to contact her somehow, or would that just put them both in more danger?
Just as Daniel was considering leaving, surely if Samantha was coming, she would have been here by now. The bell above the door jingled again. Daniel's head snapped up, and relief flooded through him as he saw Samantha walk in. She looked tired and disheveled, her clothes rumpled and her hair a mess, but she was alive and apparently unharmed. Their eyes met across the cafe, and Samantha's shoulders sagged with visible relief. As she made her way to his table, Daniel stood, fighting the urge to hug her. They weren't out of danger yet, and they needed to maintain their cover. Instead, he settled for a warm smile as Samantha sat down across from him. "You made it," he said softly, unable to keep the relief out of his voice.
Samantha nodded, a wry smile tugging at her lips. "Barely. Those guys were persistent. I had to ditch the car and spend the night hiding out in a 24-hour laundromat. But I lost them eventually." Daniel's smile faded as he remembered the gravity of their situation. "I got the data," he said, patting his bag. "Everything we need to expose Technova. But what do we do now? They know we have it. They'll be coming for us with everything they've got." Samantha's expression turned serious. "We need to get this information out there fast. But we have to be smart about it. If we just dump everything online, they'll find a way to discredit it or bury it in legal challenges." Daniel nodded, seeing the logic in her words. "So what's the plan?" "I have a contact at the FBI," Samantha said, leaning in close and lowering her voice. "Someone I trust. If we can get this information to her, she can start an official investigation. That'll make it a lot harder for Technova to sweep this under the rug." "But how do we reach out to her without tipping off Technova?" Daniel asked, his mind already racing through the possibilities and potential pitfalls. Samantha smiled, a glint of determination in her eyes. "Leave that to me. But first, we need to make copies of that data. Lots of copies. We need to make sure that even if they get to one of us, the truth still gets out." As they began to plan their next moves, Daniel felt a mix of emotions swirling within him. Fear, certainly. They were still in grave danger. But also a sense of purpose, of righteous determination. They had uncovered something terrible, something that could change the world for the worse if left unchecked. And now, against all odds, they had a chance to stop it. The next few hours were a whirlwind of activity. They moved frequently, never staying in one place for too long, always watching for signs of pursuit. They used public computers and borrowed phones to make copies of the data, storing it in encrypted cloud accounts and on physical drives that they stashed in various locations around Santa Cruz. As the day wore on, Daniel found himself marveling at Samantha's resourcefulness and determination. She seemed to have a contact for everything, someone who could provide burner phones, someone else who could create fake IDs on short notice. It was clear that her years as an investigative journalist had prepared her well for this kind of cloak and dagger operation. By late afternoon, they had done all they could to secure and distribute the data. Now came the most dangerous part of their plan, reaching out to Samantha's FBI contact. "Her name is Agent Sarah Chen," Samantha explained as they sat in yet another cafe, this one on the outskirts of town. "She's based in the San Francisco field office. I've worked with her before on some sensitive stories. If anyone can be trusted with this, it's her." Daniel nodded, trying to quell the anxiety rising in his chest. "How do we contact her without leading Technova right to us?" Samantha pulled out one of the burner phones they had acquired. "We set up a secure messaging app on this phone. I'll send her a coded message, something that will let her know it's me and that this is urgent, but won't raise red flags if it's intercepted." As Samantha composed the message, Daniel found himself glancing nervously around the cafe. Every person who entered made him tense. Every car that drove by outside seemed potentially suspicious. He knew he was being paranoid, but after everything that had happened, he couldn't help it. "It's done," Samantha said finally, putting the phone away. Now we wait. If all goes well, we should hear back from her within the hour. The next 60 minutes were some of the longest of Daniel's life. They nursed their coffees, speaking little, both lost in their own thoughts and worries. Daniel found his mind wandering to the events that had led him to this point. Just a week ago, he had been a respected software engineer, his biggest worry being whether he'd meet his next project deadline. Now, he was a fugitive, caught up in a conspiracy that threatened the very fabric of society. Just as Daniel was about to suggest they move to a new location, the burner phone buzzed. Samantha snatched it up, her eyes scanning the message that had appeared. "It's her," Samantha said, her voice tight with a mix of relief and tension. "She wants to meet, tonight." Daniel leaned forward, his heart racing. "Where?" "There's a park about halfway between here and San Francisco," Samantha explained, showing Daniel the location on a map app. "It's isolated enough to avoid prying eyes, but public enough that it would be risky for anyone to try anything." Daniel nodded, studying the map. "What time?" "Midnight," Samantha replied. "We have a few hours to prepare and get there." As they left the cafe, the gravity of what they were about to do settled over Daniel like a heavy cloak. They were about to hand over evidence of corporate espionage and potential threats to national security to the FBI. There would be no going back after this. The drive to the meeting point was tense, with both Daniel and Samantha constantly checking for any signs of pursuit. They had borrowed a car from one of Samantha's contacts, hoping to throw off anyone who might be looking for them. As they neared the park, Samantha pulled over to the side of the road. "We should approach on foot from here," she said, her voice low. "Less chance of being spotted." Daniel agreed, and they set out into the darkness, the laptop bag containing the precious data slung over his shoulder. The park was eerily quiet at this late hour, the only sounds the rustle of leaves in the gentle night breeze and the distant hoot of an owl. They made their way to the designated meeting spot, a small clearing near a cluster of old oak trees. As they approached, Daniel's heart nearly stopped as he saw a figure already waiting there. "That's her," Samantha whispered, recognizing Agent Chen. "Stay alert, though. We can't be too careful." As they stepped into the clearing, Agent Chen turned to face them. She was a petite woman in her early 40s, with short black hair and an air of quiet authority about her. "Samantha," she said by way of greeting, her eyes quickly assessing Daniel. "This must be your source." Samantha nodded. "This is Daniel. He's the one who uncovered everything." Agent Chen's gaze locked onto Daniel, her expression unreadable. "Mr. Reeves, I presume. Your sudden disappearance from Technova has caused quite a stir in certain circles." Daniel swallowed hard, unsure how to respond. But before he could say anything, a twig snapped somewhere in the darkness behind them. All three of them tensed, Agent Chen's hand moving instinctively towards her hip where her weapon was holstered. For a long, tense moment, they stood frozen, straining to hear any further sounds. Then, from the shadows, a familiar voice called out, "I'm disappointed, Daniel. I thought we were friends." Daniel's blood ran cold as Marcus Blackwood stepped into the clearing, flanked by two burly men who were unmistakably armed. "Marcus?" Daniel breathed, his mind reeling. How had they found them? Marcus's usually charming smile was now cold and predatory. "Did you really think you could steal from me and get away with it? That you could bring down everything I've built?" Agent Chen had drawn her weapon, aiming it steadily at Marcus. "Marcus Blackwood, you're under arrest for corporate espionage and conspiracy against the United States government." But Marcus seemed unfazed by the FBI agent's presence. If anything, his smile grew wider. "Oh, I don't think so, Agent Chen. You see, I have friends in very high places, friends who understand the importance of what we're doing at Technova, friends who won't let a few idealistic fools derail a project of national importance." As if on cue, more figures emerged from the darkness, men in dark suits who Daniel recognized with a sinking feeling as government agents. One of them stepped forward, addressing Agent Chen. Stand down, Agent Chen. This operation is now under the jurisdiction of the NSA. Chen's eyes widened in shock, but she didn't lower her weapon. What are you talking about? I have no orders about NSA involvement. The NSA agent produced a document. New orders straight from the top. The Technova project has been classified as a matter of national security. Mr. Blackwood and his team are to be given full cooperation. Daniel felt as if the ground was shifting beneath his feet. This couldn't be happening. They had the evidence. They were supposed to expose the truth, not watch it be buried even deeper. Samantha, ever the quick thinker, spoke up. You can't just classify this away. We have copies of the data, multiple copies, hidden where you'll never find them. If anything happens to us, it all goes public. Marcus's smile faltered for a moment, but he quickly regained his composure. A bluff, Miss Reyes. And even if it weren't, do you really think you can outmaneuver the combined resources of Technova and the United States government? Face it, you've lost. Daniel's mind raced, trying to find a way out of this nightmare. They had come so close, only to have victory snatched away at the last moment. But as he looked at the determined set of Samantha's jaw, the conflicted expression on Agent Chen's face, he realized that this wasn't over yet. You're wrong, Marcus, Daniel said, surprised by the steadiness in his voice. This isn't about winning or losing. It's about doing what's right. And what you're doing, what you're planning to do with that algorithm, it's wrong. You know it is. Marcus's expression hardened. You don't understand the bigger picture, Daniel. The world is changing. Data is the new currency, the new weapon. With our algorithm, we can predict and shape the future. We can ensure America's dominance in the digital age. At what cost? Samantha interjected. Individual privacy, free will, democracy itself? For a moment, doubt flickered across Marcus's face. But then his resolve seemed to harden. Sometimes, sacrifices must be made for the greater good. The NSA agent stepped forward again. Enough talk. Mr. Blackwood, you and your team are free to go. Agent Chen, you'll need to come with us for debriefing. As for you two, he said, turning to Daniel and Samantha, you'll be taken into custody for questioning. As the government agents moved to surround them, Daniel felt a surge of desperation. They couldn't let it end like this. In a split-second decision, he turned to Samantha and whispered, "Run." Without waiting for a response, Daniel shoved the laptop bag into Samantha's arms and then charged at Marcus, catching everyone by surprise. In the ensuing chaos, Samantha managed to slip away into the darkness of the park. Daniel found himself quickly overwhelmed, tackled to the ground by Marcus's security team. As he was handcuffed, he caught a glimpse of Agent Chen's face. To his surprise, she gave him an almost imperceptible nod before being led away by the NSA agents. As Daniel was roughly pulled to his feet, he saw Marcus watching him with a mixture of anger and something that might have been respect. "You've caused me a lot of trouble, Daniel," Marcus said quietly, "but I have to admire your determination. It's a shame we ended up on opposite sides of this." Daniel met his former boss's gaze steadily. "It's not too late, Marcus. You can still do the right thing." Marcus seemed to consider this for a moment before shaking his head. "The right thing isn't always the easy thing, Daniel. You'll understand someday." As Daniel was led away to a waiting vehicle, his thoughts were with Samantha. Had she managed to escape? Would she be able to get the information out before Technova and their government allies could stop her? The next few hours passed in a blur for Daniel. He was taken to a nondescript government facility, questioned repeatedly about the stolen data and Samantha's whereabouts. But Daniel remained silent, drawing on reserves of strength he didn't know he possessed. As dawn broke, Daniel found himself in a small, windowless room, exhausted, but still defiant. The door opened, and to his surprise, Agent Chen walked in. "You've caused quite a stir, Mr. Reeves," she said, her voice carefully neutral. Daniel studied her face, trying to gauge her intentions. "Are you here to question me too?" Chen shook her head slightly. "I'm here to tell you that your friend Miss Reyes has managed to evade capture so far.
and to let you know that not everyone in the government is on board with what Technova is doing." Hope flared in Daniel's chest. "You believe us?"
"Let's just say I have my doubts about the official story," Chen replied cautiously. "But my hands are tied, at least for now. Whatever happens next is up to you and Miss Reyes." Before Daniel could respond, the door opened again, and another agent entered. "Time's up, Chen. The prisoner is being transferred." As Daniel was led out of the room, Chen called after him, "Remember, Mr. Reeves, the truth has a way of coming out, one way or another." The next few days were a whirlwind of interrogations, transfers between facilities, and growing uncertainty. Daniel was kept isolated, with no news of the outside world or what might be happening with Samantha and the stolen data. But even as the hours stretched into days, Daniel clung to hope. He knew Samantha was out there, working tirelessly to expose the truth, and he hadn't missed the hidden message in Agent Chen's words. There were people within the system who were on their side, even if they couldn't act openly. On the 5th day of his captivity, everything changed. Daniel was abruptly roused from his cell in the middle of the night and hustled into a waiting vehicle. No one would tell him where they were going or what was happening. After a long drive, Daniel found himself being led into what appeared to be a large warehouse. As his eyes adjusted to the dim light, he was shocked to see a familiar face, Marcus Blackwood, looking far less composed than Daniel had ever seen him. "Daniel," Marcus said, his voice strained, "it seems we underestimated your journalist friend and the power of public opinion." Before Daniel could ask what he meant, a large screen on one wall flickered to life, showing a news broadcast. Daniel's jaw dropped as he saw footage of himself and Samantha, along with headlines about Technova's illegal activities and the government's attempt to cover it up. The newscaster's voice filled the warehouse. "In a shocking turn of events, evidence has emerged of a massive conspiracy involving tech giant Technova and elements within the US government. Whistleblower Daniel Reeves and investigative journalist Samantha Reyes have exposed a plot to use advanced AI technology to manipulate global data for political and economic gain. The revelations have sparked international outrage and calls for a full investigation." Daniel turned to Marcus, unable to keep the triumph from his voice. "It's over, Marcus. The truth is out." Marcus nodded, looking suddenly old and tired. "Yes, it is. And now we all have to face the consequences of our actions, including me." As if on cue, the warehouse doors burst open and a team of FBI agents flooded in, led by none other than Agent Chen. "Marcus Blackwood, you're under arrest," she announced, a hint of satisfaction in her voice. As Marcus was led away in handcuffs, Chen approached Daniel. "Mr. Reeves, you're free to go. There will be a lot of questions in the coming days, and we'll need your full cooperation with the investigation. But for now, there's someone waiting to see you." Chen led Daniel outside, where he was overjoyed to see Samantha waiting for him. They embraced, both laughing and crying with relief. "You did it," Daniel said, his voice thick with emotion. "You got the truth out." Samantha smiled, her eyes shining. "We did it, Daniel, together. And it's not over yet. There's still so much work to do, so many questions to answer." As they stood there, watching the sunrise on a new day, Daniel felt a profound sense of change. The world had shifted, secrets had been exposed, and now came the hard work of rebuilding trust and safeguarding the future. In the days and weeks that followed, Daniel and Samantha found themselves at the center of a global storm. Congressional hearings, international investigations, and a complete overhaul of data privacy laws kept them busy. Their story inspired a new wave of tech whistleblowers, leading to reforms across the industry. Technova's algorithm was placed under strict international oversight, its potential for good harnessed, while its dangers were carefully controlled. Marcus and several government officials faced trial, their actions exposed to public scrutiny. For Daniel, the experience was transformative. He had gone from a simple software engineer to a pivotal figure in one of the biggest tech scandals of the century. As he testified before Congress, consulted on new data protection legislation, and spoke at conferences around the world. He often thought back to that night in Marcus's office when he had first stumbled upon the truth. One evening, months after the initial revelations, Daniel and Samantha sat on a beach near Santa Cruz, watching the sun set over the Pacific. The chaos of the past year had finally begun to settle, and they found themselves looking towards the future. "What now?" Daniel asked, his voice quiet against the sound of the waves. Samantha turned to him, a familiar glint of determination in her eyes. "Now, we keep fighting. There will always be people trying to misuse technology to exploit data for their own gain. Our job is to stay vigilant, to keep pushing for transparency and accountability." Daniel nodded, feeling a renewed sense of purpose. "You're right. What we uncovered with Technova, it's just the tip of the iceberg. There's so much more work to be done." As they sat there, planning their next moves, Daniel reflected on the journey that had brought him to this point. He had lost his job, faced danger, and seen the darker side of the industry he once loved. But he had also found a new calling, a way to use his skills and knowledge to make a real difference in the world. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in brilliant hues of orange and pink. Daniel took a deep breath, feeling the cool ocean breeze on his face. He didn't know exactly what the future held, but he knew one thing for certain. He was ready to face it, to continue the fight for what was right. As darkness fell and the first stars began to appear in the sky, Daniel and Samantha stood up, brushing the sand from their clothes. They had a lot of work ahead of them, but together, they felt ready to take on whatever challenges came their way. They walked back towards the city, their steps in sync, two unlikely heroes united by a common purpose. The story of Technova and the algorithm that almost changed the world was over, but their journey was far from finished. In many ways, it was just beginning. As they reached the boardwalk, bustling with evening activity, Daniel paused for a moment, looking back at the darkened beach and the vast ocean beyond. He thought about the twists and turns his life had taken, the unexpected path that had led him here. "You okay?" Samantha asked, noticing his hesitation. Daniel turned back to her, a smile spreading across his face. "Yeah, I'm okay. Better than okay, actually. For the first time in a long time, I feel like I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be, doing exactly what I'm meant to do." Samantha returned his smile, understanding in her eyes. "I know the feeling. It's not an easy road we've chosen, but it's an important one." As they continued walking, blending into the crowd of tourists and locals enjoying the evening, Daniel felt a sense of peace settle over him. The journey had been difficult, filled with danger and uncertainty, but it had also been transformative. He had discovered strengths he never knew he possessed, forged friendships that would last a lifetime, and found a purpose that gave his life new meaning. The challenges ahead were daunting. There would be more battles to fight, more truths to uncover, more powerful interests to stand against. But Daniel knew he wouldn't face them alone. He had Samantha by his side, a network of allies they had built during their ordeal, and the support of countless individuals who believed in their cause. As they reached the end of the boardwalk, Samantha's phone buzzed with a notification. She pulled it out, her expression turning serious as she read the message. "What is it?" Daniel asked, sensing the shift in her mood. Samantha looked up at him, a familiar fire in her eyes. "A tip from one of my sources. Looks like there might be something going on with a biotech firm in Boston. Similar patterns to what we saw with Technova." Daniel felt a surge of adrenaline, the thrill of a new challenge. "Guess our work is never done, huh?" Samantha grinned, already tapping out a reply on her phone. Would we want it any other way? As they hailed a cab to take them back to their temporary base of operations, Daniel couldn't help but feel a sense of excitement mixed with his determination. This was his life now, uncovering truths, fighting for what was right, using his skills to make a real difference in the world. The cab pulled away from the curb, carrying them towards their next adventure. As the lights of Santa Cruz faded behind them, Daniel looked out at the night sky, feeling a profound sense of gratitude for the unexpected turn his life had taken. The road ahead was uncertain, but he was ready to face whatever challenges lay in store. As they drove through the night, Samantha began to brief Daniel on the information her source had provided about the biotech firm in Boston. The details were still vague, but there were troubling similarities to the Teknova case. Whispers of breakthrough technology being developed in secret, unusual patterns in the company's financial reports, and rumors of high-level government interest. "It's not much to go on," Samantha admitted, scrolling through the messages on her phone. "But my gut tells me there's something here. Something big." Daniel nodded, his mind already racing with possibilities. "We'll need to be careful. After Teknova, we're not exactly unknown entities anymore. If there is something going on in Boston, they'll be on high alert for anyone poking around." Samantha's eyes gleamed with the thrill of the challenge. "That just means we'll have to be smarter, more creative in our approach. We've learned a lot since Teknova, Daniel. We're not the same people we were when this all started." She was right, Daniel realized. The experiences of the past year had changed them both, honing their skills and strengthening their resolve. They were no longer a naive software engineer and an ambitious journalist stumbling onto a conspiracy. They were seasoned investigators, armed with knowledge, experience, and a network of contacts that spanned industries and governments. As they arrived at their temporary apartment, Daniel and Samantha immediately set to work. They transformed the living room into a makeshift command center, pinning notes and printouts to the walls, setting up laptops and secure communication lines. It was a familiar routine by now, one that filled Daniel with a sense of purpose. Over the next few days, they dug deep into the biotech firm's background. The company, Helix Dynamics, had burst onto the scene a few years ago with promises of revolutionary gene therapy treatments. Their early results had been promising, attracting significant investment and glowing media coverage. But recently, things had gotten quiet. Too quiet for a company supposedly on the verge of a major breakthrough. As they pieced together the puzzle, a disturbing picture began to emerge. Helix Dynamics seemed to be working on something far beyond simple medical treatments. There were hints of military contracts, heavily redacted documents that suggested research into human enhancement technologies. "This is insane," Daniel muttered, poring over a financial report that showed massive influxes of cash from shell companies they'd traced back to defense contractors. "It's like they're trying to create super soldiers or something." Samantha nodded grimly. "And if they succeed, the implications could be even more far-reaching than Teknova's algorithm. Imagine a world where those in power could literally engineer a stronger, faster, smarter workforce or army." The more they uncovered, the more urgent their mission became. But getting hard evidence proved challenging. Helix Dynamics had learned from Teknova's mistakes, burying their secrets deep and compartmentalizing information to prevent any one person from seeing the full picture. After weeks of investigation, they had a solid theory of what was happening, but lacked the smoking gun they needed to take the story public. They needed someone on the inside. Someone with access to Helix Dynamics' most closely guarded secrets. It was Daniel who finally caught the break they'd been waiting for. While scouring through employee social media profiles, he noticed a pattern. Several mid-level researchers had left the company abruptly in the past year, all citing personal reasons. But one of them, Dr. Evelyn Cho, had left a trail of cryptic posts that hinted at ethical concerns with her work. "This could be our way in," Daniel said excitedly, showing Samantha what he'd found. "If Dr. Cho left because she was uncomfortable with what Helix was doing, she might be willing to talk to us." Samantha agreed, and they began the delicate process of reaching out to Dr. Cho. It took time and patience, with several false starts and near misses. But finally, after weeks of building trust through intermediaries, Dr. Cho agreed to meet them in person. The meeting was set for a quiet park in Cambridge, not far from MIT, where Dr. Cho had taken a teaching position after leaving Helix Dynamics. As Daniel and Samantha waited on a bench, Both felt the familiar mix of anticipation and anxiety that came with these high-stakes encounters. When Dr. Cho arrived, she was nothing like the confident researcher they'd seen in her professional photos. She was nervous, constantly glancing over her shoulder as if expecting to be followed.
"I shouldn't be here," she said as soon as she sat down. "If they find out I've talked to you."
Samantha's voice was gentle but firm. "Dr. Cho, we understand the risks you're taking. But if what we suspect about Helix Dynamics is true, the world needs to know. You could be saving lives by speaking out." Dr. Cho seemed to wrestle with herself for a moment before nodding. "You're right. I can't keep this to myself any longer. What Helix is doing, it's not just unethical, it's dangerous." Over the next hour, Dr. Cho painted a chilling picture of the research being conducted at Helix Dynamics. The company had indeed made breakthroughs in gene therapy, but they weren't stopping at curing diseases. They were pushing the boundaries of human enhancement, developing techniques to increase strength, speed, and cognitive abilities far beyond natural limits. At first, we thought we were working on treatments for muscular dystrophy, Alzheimer's, things like that, Dr. Cho explained, her voice trembling slightly. But then the military contracts started coming in. They pushed us to go further, to create changes that went beyond healing, into enhancement. When I started seeing simulations of soldiers with impossible abilities, I knew I had to get out. Daniel and Samantha exchanged glances. This was even bigger than they had imagined. "Do you have any proof?" Daniel asked carefully. "Documents? Data? Anything we could use to corroborate your story?" Dr. Cho hesitated, then reached into her bag and pulled out a small flash drive. "I shouldn't have taken this, but I couldn't leave without some evidence of what we were doing. It's encrypted, and I'm not sure how much use it will be without context. But..." Samantha took the drive, her hand steady despite the weight of what it might contain. "This is incredibly brave of you, Dr. Cho. We'll do everything in our power to protect your identity when we publish this story." As they wrapped up the meeting, making plans for secure ways to stay in touch, Daniel felt a familiar surge of adrenaline. They had their lead, their insider source. Now came the hard part, verifying the information, gathering additional evidence, and preparing to go public with a story that could shake the foundations of biotechnology and military research. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of activity. Daniel threw himself into decrypting and analyzing the data from Dr. Cho's flash drive, while Samantha worked her network of contacts, seeking corroboration from other sources in the biotech industry and government. What they uncovered was staggering. Helix Dynamics wasn't just pushing the boundaries of science, they were leaping over ethical lines with abandon. The potential applications of their research went far beyond creating enhanced soldiers. There were proposals for optimizing workers for specific jobs, early-stage studies on altering human embryos to produce children with predetermined traits. "This is eugenics," Samantha said one night, her voice tight with anger as she read through a particularly disturbing report. "They're talking about creating a genetic underclass, people literally born to be subservient." Daniel felt a chill run down his spine. "And on the other end, a class of enhanced elites. It's like something out of a dystopian novel, except it's happening right now, in labs just a few miles from here." As they dug deeper, they also began to uncover connections between Helix Dynamics and powerful figures in politics and industry. There were encrypted emails suggesting that some of the world's wealthiest individuals were not just funding the research, but planned to be its first beneficiaries. The scope of the story grew with each passing day, as did the potential dangers. Daniel and Samantha knew that what they were uncovering would threaten some of the most powerful people in the world. They took extreme precautions, using encrypted communications, constantly moving between safe houses and setting up dead man switches to release their findings if anything happened to them. Despite their caution, there were signs that Helix Dynamics was becoming aware of their investigation. Dr. Cho reported being followed, and there were attempts to hack into Samantha's secure servers. The pressure was mounting, and they knew they were in a race against time to get the story out before they were silenced. It all came to a head on a rainy night in Boston. Daniel was working late, sifting through financial records, when he stumbled upon a startling connection. A series of shell companies linked Helix Dynamics to none other than Marcus Blackwood, the disgraced former CEO of Technova.
"Samantha, look at this,"
Daniel called out, his voice tight with excitement and dread. "Marcus is involved. He must have started setting this up even before Technova fell apart." Samantha rushed over, her eyes widening as she saw the evidence on Daniel's screen. "This is it. This is the missing piece. With this, we can show that this isn't just one company gone rogue. It's a coordinated effort spanning multiple industries to fundamentally reshape humanity." As they stood there, the magnitude of their discovery sinking in, the lights in their safe house suddenly went out. In the moment of darkness before emergency power kicked in, they heard the unmistakable sound of breaking glass. "They're here," Samantha whispered, already moving to grab their go-bags. "We need to move now." Daniel quickly initiated their emergency protocols, sending out encrypted bursts of data to their secure servers and trusted contacts. As he finished, he heard heavy footsteps on the stairs leading to their floor. "No time for the stairs," he said, grabbing Samantha's hand and pulling her towards the window. "We need to go out the way they came in." In a scene reminiscent of their escape from Technova all those months ago, Daniel and Samantha found themselves climbing down a fire escape in the pouring rain, the sounds of pursuit not far behind. But this time, they were more prepared, more experienced. They had a plan. As they reached the ground and took off running through the dark alleys of Boston, Daniel felt a strange mix of fear and exhilaration. They were in danger, yes, but they were also on the verge of exposing a conspiracy that made Technova look like small potatoes in comparison. They ran through the rain-slicked streets, ducking into shadows and doubling back to throw off their pursuers. Finally, after what felt like hours, but was probably only 20 minutes, they reached their predetermined emergency rendezvous point, a 24-hour diner on the outskirts of the city. Soaked and out of breath, they slid into a booth at the back of the nearly empty diner. The elderly waitress barely glanced at them as she poured them coffee, used to all types at this hour. "What now?" Daniel asked, his voice low as he scanned the diner for any signs of threat. Samantha took a sip of her coffee, her mind clearly racing. "We need to accelerate our timeline. They know we're onto them, which means we don't have the luxury of double and triple checking everything. We need to get what we have out there now." Daniel nodded, seeing the logic in her words. "But how? They'll be watching all our usual channels." A slow smile spread across Samantha's face. "Remember that contact I made at WikiLeaks during the Technova fallout? I think it's time we called in that favor." As Samantha began typing furiously on her phone, setting their new plan in motion, Daniel allowed himself a moment to reflect on how far they'd come. A year ago, he would have been paralyzed with fear in this situation. Now, he felt focused, determined. They had uncovered something monumental, something that could change the course of human history. And come hell or high water, they were going to make sure the world knew about it. The next 48 hours were a blur of activity, working from a series of ever-changing locations, coffee shops, libraries, even a late-night laundromat. Daniel and Samantha raced to compile all their evidence into a coherent, undeniable exposé. They cross-referenced data, verified sources, and crafted a narrative that would be impossible to ignore or discredit. All the while, they could feel the net closing in around them. Twice they spotted suspicious vehicles tailing them, forcing quick changes of plan. Daniel's hacker contacts reported increased chatter about a high-priority search in the Boston area. They were running out of time. Finally, as dawn broke on the second day, Samantha received the confirmation they'd been waiting for. Their WikiLeaks contact was ready to publish. With trembling fingers, Samantha sent the final encrypted package of data, along with a pre-prepared press release that would go out to major news outlets worldwide. "It's done," she said, looking up at Daniel with a mix of exhaustion and triumph. "In 1 hour, the world is going to change." They made their way to Boston Common, finding a bench with a good view of the surrounding area. As the morning joggers and early commuters began to fill the park, Daniel and Samantha sat in tense silence, watching the minutes tick by on Samantha's watch. At exactly 7 a.m., their phones began to buzz with incoming notifications. The story was breaking, spreading across social media and news sites like wildfire. Within minutes, they could see people in the park stopping to stare at their phones, expressions of shock and disbelief on their faces. "We did it," Daniel breathed, a wave of relief washing over him. "It's out there. They can't stop it now." Samantha nodded, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "This is bigger than Technova, Daniel. This is going to shake the world to its core." As they sat there, watching the world react to their revelations in real time, Daniel felt a profound sense of accomplishment mixed with trepidation. They had exposed a conspiracy that threatened the very nature of humanity. But the fight was far from over. There would be denials, attempts to discredit them, maybe even threats to their lives. But looking at Samantha, seeing the determination in her eyes, Daniel knew they were ready for whatever came next. They had started this journey as unlikely allies, thrust together by circumstance. Now, they were partners, friends, maybe even something more, bonded by shared purpose and the weight of the truths they had uncovered. As the morning wore on, and the park filled with people animatedly discussing the breaking news, Daniel and Samantha quietly slipped away. They had more work to do, more truths to uncover. The world was changing, and they were at the forefront of that change. Walking side by side, they headed towards an uncertain but exciting future, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The night Daniel had been fired from Technova seemed like a lifetime ago. He had lost a job but found a calling, lost his naivete but gained a deeper understanding of the world and his place in it. As they disappeared into the bustling streets of Boston, just two faces in the crowd, Daniel allowed himself a small smile. The road ahead would be difficult, but he wouldn't want to be anywhere else, doing anything else. He had found his purpose, and alongside Samantha, he was ready to keep fighting for truth, justice, and the future of humanity. The story of Technova, Helix Dynamics, and the brave individuals who exposed their misdeeds would be told for years to come. But for Daniel and Samantha, it was just the beginning. There would be more conspiracies to unravel, more truths to uncover, more battles to fight in the ever-evolving landscape of technology and power. And they would be there, on the front lines, armed with their intelligence, their integrity, and their unwavering commitment to doing what's right. In a world of rapidly advancing technology and shifting ethical boundaries, they had become the watchdogs, the whistleblowers, the guardians of truth. As they walked, Samantha's phone buzzed with another notification. She glanced at it, then looked at Daniel with a mixture of excitement and determination. "Looks like our expose is already having ripple effects. There are reports of unrest at several major tech companies, and calls for congressional investigations are pouring in." Daniel nodded, feeling a surge of energy despite their exhaustion. "We've opened Pandora's box. There's no going back now." "No," Samantha agreed, a fierce glint in her eye. "Only forward." With that, they hailed a taxi, ready to dive back into the fray. The world was waking up to the dangers they had exposed, and Daniel and Samantha would be there every step of the way, shining a light on the darkness and fighting for a future where technology served humanity, not the other way around. As the taxi pulled away from the curb, carrying them towards their next challenge, Daniel felt a sense of peace settle over him. He had found his place in the world, his purpose, and no matter what dangers or difficulties lay ahead, he knew he was exactly where he was meant to be. The taxi wove through the increasingly congested Boston streets, the driver occasionally glancing at them in the rearview mirror with a mix of curiosity and awe. It was clear he had recognized them from the breaking news, but to his credit, he remained professional and didn't pry. As they drove, Daniel and Samantha's phones continued to buzz incessantly with notifications. The story was spreading faster than they had anticipated, dominating social media news channels, and online forums. Hashtags related to helix dynamics and genetic engineering were trending worldwide. "We should probably turn these off for a while," Samantha said, powering down her phone. "We need to stay focused, and we can't let ourselves get distracted by the immediate reactions." Daniel nodded, following suit. "You're right. We need to stay ahead of this. What's our next move?"
Samantha's brow furrowed in thought. "We need to get somewhere safe, somewhere we can regroup and plan our next steps. I have a contact, an old college professor of mine. He has a cabin in the Berkshires. It's isolated, off the grid. We should be able to lay low there for a few days while we figure out our next move."
The idea of retreating to a secluded cabin brought back memories of the early days of the Technova investigation for Daniel. It seemed like a lifetime ago now. He had been so naive then, so unprepared for the magnitude of what they were uncovering. Now, he felt battle-hardened, ready to face whatever came next. "Sounds like a plan," he agreed. "But first, we need to make sure we haven't been followed." Over the next few hours, Daniel and Samantha employed every evasion tactic they had learned over the past year. They switched taxis multiple times, took a roundabout bus route, and even briefly boarded a train heading in the opposite direction of their true destination. By the time they finally arrived at the small town nearest to the cabin, they were reasonably confident they had lost any potential tail. The cabin itself was a rustic two-room structure nestled deep in the woods. It was basic, no electricity, no running water, but it was secure and, most importantly, isolated from the chaos they had unleashed upon the world. As night fell, they sat on the cabin's small porch, watching the stars emerge in the clear sky. The silence of the forest was a stark contrast to the frenetic energy of the city they had left behind. "Do you ever wonder," Daniel said softly, breaking the comfortable silence, "if we're doing the right thing? If exposing all of this is really making the world a better place?" Samantha turned to look at him, her expression serious in the fading light. "All the time," she admitted. "But then I think about the alternative. A world where corporations and governments can secretly reshape humanity itself, where the rich and powerful can literally engineer themselves to be superior. That's not a world I want to live in." Daniel nodded, feeling reassured by her words. "You're right. It's just, sometimes the weight of it all, the responsibility, it feels overwhelming." Samantha reached out and took his hand, squeezing it gently. "That's why we have each other. We're in this together, Daniel. We balance each other out, keep each other grounded." As they sat there, hand in hand, Daniel felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the mild summer night. Over the past year, Samantha had become more than just a partner in their investigations. She had become his closest friend, his confidant, and perhaps something more. The intensity of their shared experiences had forged a bond between them that went beyond simple friendship or professional collaboration. The moment was interrupted by a distant sound, the unmistakable whir of helicopter blades. Daniel and Samantha exchanged alarmed glances before quickly retreating into the cabin, dousing all lights. From the window, they watched as a searchlight swept across the forest canopy, seemingly random at first, but then with a clear pattern. They were being hunted. "How did they find us so quickly?" Daniel whispered, his mind racing through possibilities. Samantha's expression was grim. "They must have more resources than we anticipated. We need to move now." Grabbing their go-bags, always packed and ready for such an eventuality, they slipped out the back of the cabin. Years of investigating conspiracies and evading pursuit had honed their skills, and they moved through the dark forest with a quiet efficiency that would have been impossible for them a year ago. As they navigated the rough terrain, using only the moonlight to guide them, Daniel's mind was working overtime. The speed and scale of the response to their revelations suggested that helix dynamics and their allies were even more powerful and far-reaching than they had realized. After what felt like hours of trekking through the wilderness, they finally reached a small, rarely used road. Samantha pulled out a burner phone, one they had kept powered off for emergencies, and made a call. "We need extraction," she said simply when the call was answered. "Plan C." Within 20 minutes, an old pickup truck rumbled down the road, driven by a grizzled man who nodded at them without a word. As they climbed into the truck bed, concealing themselves under a tarp, Daniel marveled once again at Samantha's network of contacts. She seemed to have allies everywhere, people willing to help at a moment's notice without asking questions. The truck drove through the night, taking a circuitous route that even Daniel, with his keen sense of direction, found hard to follow. Finally, as dawn was breaking, they arrived at a small, private airfield. A nondescript twin-engine plane was waiting for them, its propellers already spinning. As they boarded, the pilot, another of Samantha's seemingly endless supply of contacts, handed them each a folder. "New identities," he explained curtly. "As far as the world is concerned, you're now David and Sarah Thompson, freelance travel writers from Canada." As the plane took off, climbing into the pink-tinged morning sky, Daniel opened his folder and stared at the unfamiliar face in the passport photo. It was him, but subtly altered. Hair a different color, a small scar added near his eyebrow. "Where are we going?" he asked Samantha, who was similarly examining her new identity. "Iceland," she replied. "It's one of the few places left with strong whistleblower protections. We'll be safer there, at least for a while." As the American coastline receded behind them, Daniel felt a complex mix of emotions. They were leaving behind everything they knew, potentially for good. But they were also moving towards something new, a continuation of the important work they had started. The flight to Iceland was long and tense, with both Daniel and Samantha constantly on alert for any sign that their escape had been compromised. But as they finally descended towards Reykjavik, the otherworldly landscape of Iceland spreading out beneath them, they allowed themselves to relax slightly. Their relief was short-lived, however. As they went through customs, Daniel noticed a pair of men in dark suits watching them intently. He gave Samantha a subtle signal, and they smoothly shifted into one of the evasion protocols they had practiced countless times. What followed was a tense game of cat and mouse through the streets of Reykjavik. Daniel and Samantha used every trick they knew, doubling back, using crowds as cover, quickly changing their appearances with hats and jackets purchased from street vendors. Finally, after hours of evasion, they felt confident enough to check into a small, out-of-the-way guest house. As they collapsed onto the beds in their sparse but clean room, the adrenaline of the day finally wearing off, Samantha turned to Daniel with a wry smile. "Welcome to our new life," she said. "Somehow, I don't think we'll be doing much travel writing." Daniel couldn't help but chuckle, despite the gravity of their situation. "No, I suppose not. But we will be continuing our real work. The story's out there now. But that's just the beginning. We need to keep pushing, keep investigating." Samantha nodded, her expression turning serious. "You're right. Helix Dynamics was just the tip of the iceberg. Now that we know what to look for, I'm certain we'll find similar projects in other countries, other industries." As they began to plan their next moves, Daniel felt a renewed sense of purpose. Yes, they were fugitives now, living under assumed identities in a foreign country. But they were also at the forefront of perhaps the most important fight of the 21st century, the battle to ensure that rapidly advancing technology remained a tool for the betterment of humanity, not a weapon for control and oppression. Over the next few weeks, Daniel and Samantha settled into a new routine in Reykjavik. They set up a secure communication network, reaching out to trusted contacts and fellow whistleblowers around the world. Their small guest house room became a hub of activity, with encrypted messages flowing in and out at all hours. They quickly discovered that their exposé of Helix Dynamics had opened a floodgate. Whistleblowers from other biotech firms, AI companies, and even government agencies began reaching out, sharing information about similar projects and ethical breaches. It became clear that what they had uncovered was not an isolated incident, but part of a larger, global trend. Powerful interests around the world were racing to develop technologies that could fundamentally alter human biology and society itself. One particularly disturbing lead came from a source within a major tech company in China. The source claimed that the company, in collaboration with the government, was developing an AI system that could predict an individual's future actions and societal value based on their genetic profile and early childhood data. "This is terrifying," Daniel said, as they pored over the encrypted files their source had provided. "They're not just talking about enhancing humans anymore. They're trying to predetermine people's entire lives before they're even born." Samantha nodded grimly. "And you can bet that if they're working on this in China, similar projects are underway in other countries too. Maybe not as openly, but the temptation to use these technologies for control is universal." As they dug deeper into this new lead, they began to see connections between various projects around the world. It wasn't a coordinated conspiracy exactly, but rather a kind of technological arms race. Nations and corporations were competing to develop these powerful new tools, each afraid of falling behind. Their investigation took on a new urgency. It wasn't enough to simply expose individual projects anymore. They needed to help the world understand the full scope of what was happening, to spark a global conversation about the ethical implications of these emerging technologies. To that end, Daniel and Samantha began working on a comprehensive report, synthesizing all the information they had gathered. They reached out to ethicists, scientists, and policy experts, seeking input and analysis. As their report took shape, they also started planning for its release. They knew that simply publishing online wouldn't be enough this time. The powers they were up against were too strong, too adept at manipulating online narratives. "We need to do something big," Samantha said one night as they were brainstorming ideas. "Something that can't be ignored or swept under the rug." Daniel thought for a moment, then a daring idea struck him. "What if we hijack the upcoming World Economic Forum in Davos? All the world's most powerful people will be there. If we could get our message out in that forum, it would be impossible to ignore." Samantha's eyes lit up with excitement. "That's brilliant, Daniel. Risky as hell, but brilliant. We'd need help, though. A lot of help." And so began the most audacious plan of their careers. Over the next few months, they worked tirelessly, coordinating with a network of hackers, activists, and sympathetic insiders. They prepared not just to release their report, but to broadcast it directly to the attendees of the World Economic Forum and to live stream it to the world. As the date of the forum approached, Daniel and Samantha made their way to Switzerland, traveling separately and using a series of false identities. The plan was complex, with multiple backup scenarios and escape routes. Everything had to be timed perfectly. On the opening day of the forum, as the world's elite gathered in the luxurious conference center, Daniel and Samantha put their plan into action. With the help of their hacker allies, they took control of the forum's audio-visual systems. Suddenly, every screen in the building, from the main stage to the smallest breakout room, was displaying their faces. "Ladies and gentlemen," Samantha began, her voice ringing out clearly through the state-of-the-art sound system. "We apologize for this interruption, but what we have to share cannot wait." Over the next hour, Daniel and Samantha laid out their findings, presenting irrefutable evidence of the global race to develop technologies that could reshape humanity. They explained the potential consequences, the ethical dilemmas, and the urgent need for global cooperation and regulation. As they spoke, they could see the shocked and sometimes angry faces of the attendees, but they could also see understanding dawning in some eyes, and even nods of agreement from a few. When they finished, there was a moment of stunned silence before the room erupted into chaos. Security teams scrambled to regain control of the systems, attendees argued loudly with each other, and journalists frantically began reporting on what they had just witnessed. Daniel and Samantha didn't stick around to see the immediate aftermath. As soon as their broadcast ended, they were on the move, using the confusion to slip away unnoticed. They had prepared multiple escape routes, and they used every evasion tactic they knew to make their way out of Davos and across the Swiss border. It wasn't until they were safely ensconced in a small chalet in the French Alps, watching the global reaction unfold on a battered old television, that they allowed themselves to relax slightly.
"We did it," Daniel said, a note of awe in his voice. "We actually did it." Samantha nodded, her eyes fixed on the screen where world leaders were being bombarded with questions about the revelations. "We got the message out. Now it's up to the world to decide what to do with it." As they watched, it became clear that their actions had sparked a global debate unlike anything seen before. The ethical implications of human enhancement technologies, AI prediction systems, and genetic engineering were suddenly at the forefront of public discourse. In the days and weeks that followed, governments around the world were forced to address the issues Daniel and Samantha had raised. Some tried to deny or downplay the revelations, but the evidence was too strong, the implications too serious to ignore. International summits were hastily convened to discuss potential regulations and safeguards. Tech companies found themselves under intense scrutiny, with many forced to suspend or significantly alter their most controversial projects. For Daniel and Samantha, the success of their Davos plan marked a turning point. They had moved beyond simply exposing individual wrongdoings to shaping global policy and public opinion. But with this increased influence came increased danger. They knew that powerful interests around the world now saw them as a serious threat. Their lives would never be truly safe or normal again. But as they sat in their Alpine hideaway, planning their next moves, neither of them would have chosen any other path. "What now?" Daniel asked, turning away from the TV to look at Samantha. She met his gaze, a familiar fire in her eyes. Now we keep going. There's still so much work to do. We've opened the world's eyes, but we need to make sure they stay open. We need to keep investigating, keep exposing, keep pushing for change." Daniel nodded, feeling a surge of determination. "You're right. This isn't the end. It's just the beginning of a new chapter." As they began to plan their next investigation, Daniel reflected on how far they had come. From a software engineer and a journalist thrust together by circumstance, they had become something more: guardians of truth, champions of ethical technology, voices for those who couldn't speak for themselves. The road ahead would be difficult and dangerous, but Daniel knew that with Samantha by his side, there was nothing they couldn't face. Together, they would continue their fight for a future where technology served humanity's best interests, not its worst impulses. As the sun set over the Alpine peaks, casting a golden glow over their small chalet, Daniel and Samantha settled in for another long night of work. The world was changing, and they were at the forefront of that change, guiding it towards a more ethical, more equitable future. Their journey was far from over. In fact, in many ways, it was just beginning. But whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, armed with their intelligence, their integrity, and their unwavering commitment to doing what's right. And so, as the world grappled with the revelations they had brought to light, Daniel and Samantha pressed on, ready to uncover the next big story, to expose the next hidden truth. For them, this wasn't just a job or a mission. It was a calling to safeguard the future of humanity in an age of rapid technological change. As they worked into the night, their faces illuminated by the glow of computer screens, Daniel caught Samantha's eye and smiled. She returned the smile, and in that moment, no words were needed. They both knew that whatever the future held, they would face it side by side, united in their quest for truth and justice. The story of Daniel Reeves, the once naive software engineer turned global whistleblower, was far from over. In fact, it was evolving in ways he could never have imagined on that fateful night when he was fired from Technova. As the world continued to reel from their Davos revelations, Daniel and Samantha found themselves at the center of a growing movement. Whistleblowers, ethical hackers, and concerned scientists from around the globe began reaching out to them, seeing them as leaders in the fight for responsible technological development. Recognizing the need for a more organized approach, Daniel and Samantha decided to establish a formal organization. They called it the Global Tech Ethics Alliance, GTEA,
a decentralized network of experts and activists dedicated to monitoring and exposing unethical practices in the tech industry. Setting up GTEA was no small feat. They had to balance the need for transparency with the necessity of protecting their members, many of whom were risking their careers and even their freedom to share information. Daniel's software engineering skills proved invaluable as he worked to create secure communication channels and data storage systems for the Alliance. Samantha, meanwhile, focused on building relationships with journalists, policymakers, and ethical tech companies. Her years of experience in investigative journalism had given her a keen sense of how to navigate the complex world of international politics and media. As GTEA grew, so did its impact. They began publishing regular reports on emerging technologies and their potential ethical implications. These reports quickly became must-read documents for tech journalists, regulators, and industry insiders. One particularly impactful investigation led them to uncover a secret project in a major Silicon Valley company. The project, codenamed Prometheus, was aimed at developing an AI system capable of manipulating human emotions on a mass scale. The potential for abuse was staggering, from influencing elections to inciting social unrest. Daniel and Samantha worked tirelessly with their GTEA colleagues to gather evidence and build a bulletproof case. When they finally went public with their findings, the backlash against the company was immediate and severe. Stock prices plummeted, executives resigned, and governments around the world launched investigations. But their success also made them targets. One evening, as they were working late in their makeshift GTEA headquarters, a converted warehouse in Berlin, they received an urgent message from one of their security team members. "We've detected a breach in our outer firewall," the message read. "This is not a routine attack. Whoever's doing this has resources we've never seen before." Daniel sprang into action, his fingers flying over the keyboard as he worked to reinforce their digital defenses. Samantha coordinated with their team, ensuring that all sensitive data was being moved to secure offline storage. For hours, they battled against the unseen attacker in a high-stakes digital chess game. Just when they thought they had patched one vulnerability, another would appear. It was unlike anything Daniel had ever encountered. As dawn broke over Berlin, they finally managed to repel the attack. But the close call left them shaken. "They're getting desperate," Samantha said, her voice hoarse from the long night. "We must be getting close to something big." Daniel nodded, rubbing his tired eyes. "But what? And who has the capability to launch an attack like that?" Their questions were answered sooner than they expected. The next day, they received an encrypted message from a new source, claiming to be a high-level insider in a secretive government agency. The source, who used the pseudonym Cassandra, claimed that the attack on GTEA's systems was just the beginning. According to Cassandra, a coalition of government agencies and tech companies from several countries had formed a secret group called the Nexus Initiative. Their goal? To develop a global surveillance and control system that would make George Orwell's 1984 look quaint by comparison. At the heart of the Nexus Initiative was a project to create a quantum AI system that could process and analyze data from every connected device on the planet. This AI would be capable of predicting and influencing human behavior on an unprecedented scale. As Daniel and Samantha delved deeper into Cassandra's information, they realized they were dealing with something far beyond anything they had encountered before. This wasn't just one company or one government overstepping ethical bounds. This was a coordinated, multinational effort to reshape the very nature of human society. The implications were staggering. If the Nexus Initiative succeeded, personal privacy would become a thing of the past. Governments and corporations would have the ability to manipulate public opinion, consumer behavior, and even individual thoughts on a massive scale. "We have to stop this," Daniel said, his voice filled with determination. "But how? This is bigger than anything we've faced before." Samantha was quiet for a moment, her brow furrowed in thought. "We need to go big, bigger than Davos. We need to create a global movement, something that will make it impossible for the Nexus Initiative to operate in the shadows." And so began the most ambitious and dangerous project of their lives. Over the next several months, Daniel and Samantha worked tirelessly to build a coalition of allies. They reached out to privacy advocates, human rights organizations, ethical AI researchers, and even sympathetic government officials from countries not involved in the Nexus initiative. They called their movement Operation Lighthouse, with the goal of shining a light on the dark corners of the tech world and illuminating the path towards a more ethical, transparent future. The work was exhausting and often disheartening. For every ally they made, they seemed to make two new enemies. There were more cyber attacks, physical threats, and attempts to discredit them in the media. Daniel and Samantha found themselves constantly on the move, never staying in one place for more than a few days at a time. But slowly, surely, their efforts began to pay off. Awareness of the potential dangers of unchecked AI and surveillance technology began to grow. Protests erupted in cities around the world, demanding greater transparency and ethical guidelines for tech development. The turning point came when Daniel and Samantha managed to convince a group of ethical hackers to infiltrate the Nexus Initiative's systems. The hackers, who called themselves the Digital Liberation Front, managed to extract terabytes of data proving the existence of the project and its true scope. Armed with this information, Operation Lighthouse launched a coordinated global information campaign. They released evidence to trusted journalists in every major country, timed to coincide with a series of public demonstrations and online events. The world's reaction was explosive. The revelations dominated headlines for weeks. Governments implicated in the Nexus initiative faced harsh criticism and calls for regime change. Tech companies saw their stock prices plummet as users abandoned their products in droves. In the midst of the chaos, Daniel and Samantha found themselves thrust into the global spotlight like never before. They were hailed as heroes by many, vilified as traitors by others. News outlets clamored for interviews, governments demanded their extradition, and supporters rallied to protect them. Through it all, Daniel and Samantha remained focused on their ultimate goal, not just exposing the Nexus initiative, but ensuring that nothing like it could ever happen again. They worked with international legal experts to draft a proposed Global Digital Rights Convention, a set of binding international laws to protect privacy and regulate the development of AI and surveillance technologies. The draft convention quickly gained support from numerous countries and became a central topic at an emergency session of the United Nations. As the world debated the future of technology and privacy, Daniel and Samantha found themselves reflecting on their journey. They had come so far from that night when Daniel had stumbled upon Technova's secrets. They had faced dangers they could never have imagined, made sacrifices they never thought they'd have to make. But sitting together one evening, watching the sunset from a safe house in Cape Town, they both knew they wouldn't have had it any other way. "Do you ever wonder what your life would have been like if you hadn't been fired that night?" Samantha asked, her head resting on Daniel's shoulder. Daniel was quiet for a moment, considering the question. "Sometimes," he admitted. "But then I think about all we've accomplished, all the people we've helped. I wouldn't trade this life for anything." Samantha smiled, entwining her fingers with his. "Me neither. Whatever happens next, I'm glad we're in this together." As they sat there, enjoying a rare moment of peace, Daniel's phone buzzed with an encrypted message. It was from one of their GTEA colleagues, marked urgent. "What is it?" Samantha asked, noticing the change in Daniel's expression as he read the message. "It's about the UN vote on the Digital Rights Convention," Daniel said, his voice a mix of excitement and apprehension. "It's happening tomorrow. Our sources say it's going to be close." Samantha sat up straighter, her mind already racing with plans. "Then we have work to do. One last push to make sure it passes." Daniel nodded, feeling the familiar surge of adrenaline that came with a new challenge. "One last push," he agreed. As they sprang into action, reaching out to their network of allies and preparing statements for the media, Daniel felt a profound sense of purpose. This vote could be the culmination of everything they had fought for over the past few years. A chance to enshrine digital rights and ethical technology development into international law. The next 24 hours were a whirlwind of activity. Daniel and Samantha coordinated with GTEA members around the world, lobbying undecided countries, rallying public support through social media campaigns, and providing last-minute evidence to key UN delegates. As the vote approached, they made their way to New York, using a series of carefully planned routes and false identities to avoid detection. They couldn't be in the UN building itself. There were still too many countries that wanted to arrest them. But they set up in a safe house nearby, monitoring the proceedings via a secure video link. The debate was intense, with impassioned speeches from both sides. Proponents of the convention argued for the need to protect individual privacy and freedom in the digital age. Opponents claimed the convention would stifle innovation and weaken national security. As the arguments went back and forth, Daniel and Samantha worked tirelessly behind the scenes, providing real-time fact-checking and additional information to friendly delegates. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, the time came for the vote. Daniel and Samantha sat hand in hand, barely breathing as they watched the electronic tally board. The numbers were close, painfully close. For a few heart-stopping moments, it looked like the convention might fail. But then, in the final seconds, 2 more countries changed their votes to yes.
The Global Digital Rights Convention had passed. The safe house erupted in cheers. Daniel and Samantha embraced, tears of joy and relief streaming down their faces. They had done it. After years of struggle, danger, and sacrifice, they had helped change the world for the better. In the days that followed, as the implications of the new convention began to sink in, Daniel and Samantha found themselves at a crossroads. The immediate threat of the Nexus initiative had been neutralized, and there were now international laws in place to prevent similar projects in the future.
So what now? Daniel asked, as they sat in a quiet cafe in Brooklyn, finally allowing themselves a moment to relax. Do we go back to our old lives? Try to be normal again? Samantha laughed softly. I'm not sure I remember what normal feels like. And honestly, I'm not sure I want to go back. There's still so much work to do. Daniel nodded, understanding completely. You're right. The convention is a huge step forward, but it's not the end. We need to make sure it's enforced, help draft similar laws at national levels, keep monitoring for new threats. Exactly, Samantha agreed. But maybe we can do it a little differently now. We don't have to be on the run anymore. We could set up a proper organization, work more openly. The idea was both exciting and a little terrifying. After years of living in the shadows, the thought of stepping into the light was daunting. But it also felt right. Over the next few months, Daniel and Samantha worked to transform GTEA from a loose network of whistleblowers into a formal international non-profit organization. They established headquarters in Geneva, symbolically close to many international organizations, but in a country with strong privacy protections. The new GTEA focused on 3 main areas: monitoring tech companies and governments for ethical violations, advocating for strong digital rights laws, and promoting education about technology ethics and digital privacy. Daniel took charge of the technical side, developing cutting-edge tools for data analysis and secure communication. Samantha headed up the advocacy and media relations teams, becoming a respected voice in international policy discussions. Their work was no longer cloak and dagger, but it was no less impactful. They testified before parliaments, consulted with tech companies on ethical guidelines, and launched educational programs in schools around the world. Of course, there were still challenges. Some of the entities they had exposed in the past continued to work against them, trying to discredit their work or lobby against the digital rights laws they advocated for. But now, operating in the open with the support of millions around the world, Daniel and Samantha found these challenges easier to face. As the years passed, Daniel and Samantha's partnership deepened in every way. They were more than just colleagues or friends. They were soulmates, bound together by shared purpose and mutual respect. They married in a small, private ceremony, attended only by their closest friends and allies from their years of activism. Their honeymoon was unconventional, a working trip to a tech ethics conference in Tokyo, but neither of them would have wanted it any other way. They were never happier than when they were working together to make the world a better place. One crisp autumn morning, 5 years after the passing of the Global Digital Rights Convention, Daniel and Samantha stood together on the balcony of their Geneva apartment, looking out over Lake Geneva. They had just received news that the last holdout country had finally ratified the convention, making it truly global in scope. "We've come so far," Daniel said, his arm around Samantha's waist. "Sometimes I can hardly believe it." Samantha leaned into him, a contented smile on her face. "It's amazing, isn't it? But you know what excites me even more?" "What's that?" "Thinking about what we'll accomplish in the next 5 years, or the next 10. The work is never really done, is it?" Daniel chuckled, planting a kiss on the top of her head. "No, it's not. But I can't think of anyone I'd rather do it with than you." As they stood there, enjoying the moment of triumph, but already planning their next moves, Daniel reflected on the incredible journey that had brought him to this point. From a software engineer focused on climbing the corporate ladder, he had become a crusader for digital rights and ethical technology. He had found his true calling, and more importantly, he had found his true partner in Samantha. The road ahead would undoubtedly hold new challenges. Technology would continue to advance, bringing with it new ethical dilemmas and potential threats to privacy and freedom. But Daniel and Samantha were ready to face whatever came their way, together. As the sun rose higher in the sky, painting the lake in dazzling hues of gold and blue, Daniel and Samantha shared a look of understanding. Without a word, they turned and went back inside, ready to start another day of working towards a better, more ethical digital future for all. Their story was far from over. In many ways, it felt like it was just beginning. But one thing was certain: whatever the future held, Daniel Reeves and Samantha Reyes would face it together, continuing their tireless work to ensure that technology remained a force for good in the world. And so, as they settled into another day at GTEA headquarters, surrounded by dedicated colleagues and facing new challenges, Daniel and Samantha knew that they were exactly where they were meant to be. Their journey from whistleblowers to world-renowned digital rights advocates had been long and often dangerous, but it had led them to a life of purpose, impact, and deep personal fulfillment. The battle for ethical technology and digital rights would never truly be over, but with each passing day, Daniel and Samantha were helping to create a world where privacy was protected, technology served humanity's best interests, and the digital realm was a space of freedom and opportunity for all. As they dove into their work, tackling new challenges and fighting new battles, Daniel and Samantha were ready for whatever the future might bring. Their love for each other and their commitment to their cause would continue to drive them forward, inspiring others and changing the world, one line of code, one policy, one life at a time. And so, the story of Daniel Reeves, the man who lost his job but found his calling, continues. It is a story of courage, of perseverance, of the power of truth, and the importance of standing up for what's right. But most of all, it is a story of hope. Hope for a future where technology and humanity coexist in harmony, guided by ethical principles and a commitment to the greater good. As Daniel looked across the room at Samantha, deeply engrossed in a conversation with a group of young activists, he smiled to himself. Whatever challenges tomorrow might bring, he knew they would face them together, and in that knowledge, he found strength, purpose, and a deep, abiding joy.